to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. In this episode, Tim and I, PRI's Director of Communications, made a visit to the Sacramento Bee's Capitol Bureau to sit down with Bryan Anderson, the new political reporter at the Sacramento Bee and the editor of the Bee's morning newsletter on state politics, Capitol Alert. Bryan grew up in the Bay Area but went to college in the Tar Heel State and previously covered the North Carolina Legislature for the Raleigh News and Observer. Tim and Bryan discussed the DMV wait time scandal, privacy legislation, California Environmental Quality Act reforms for stadiums, and how covering North Carolina politics compares with California. Thanks for joining us.
Well, Bryan, welcome to Next Round. We're so thrilled to have you here in maybe we're still in the afterglow of the end of the legislative session. And you joined the Bee this summer as a political reporter, and you also oversee Capitol Alert, which is my go-to thing first thing in the morning. So tell our listeners about some of the things that you're covering and what Capitol Alert is and why, like me, they should subscribe and read it religiously every day.
Well, first, I'm happy you read it religiously. We need more and more readers like you. What Capitol Alert is it's a newsletter that comes out 4 times a week. Sometimes on busy weeks, it'll be 5 times a week. And it'll be around 6 in the morning, gives you a good roundup of what you can expect for the day. Sometimes it gives you a look back at what you might have missed the previous day and gives you a good, quick little glimpse into what's going on in the Capitol community, whether it's the legislature, the governor's office. And as far as what I'm covering, I would say I'm the general assignment reporter. That comes with the territory of overseeing the Capitol Alert newsletter, where I can be working on a U.S. House story or covering campaign finance, so it's all over the map. But we're also going to be dabbling shortly into the audio arena very soon, which I'm looking forward to. And I'm also passionate about tech and consumer privacy and issues of that nature.
So this summer was your first here covering the, I would say, often wacky world of California politics. And so coming into this world from afar, what's your initial observations and takeaway from your first legislative session, your first summer here in Sacramento?
Honestly, it wasn't as wacky as I had expected or had anticipated. I mean, we got out of the legislature dozens of minutes before it was set to expire. So I was thinking, wow, this is a pretty good surprise. Things are moving quickly here. But as far as the activity goes, there's no shortage of stories or items to be looking at. But I would say I came in with an expectation that it would be very active, and so far my expectations have been met.
Well, I'm sure next year, because we have the Constitution, so you have to be done at midnight for anything that isn't an urgency bill. And I can hear people turning their dials across the internet as I say that. But next year, when there isn't that, you might make up for all the sleep that you got. I think the latest I ever went home, well, there was one year when we had the 2009 budget where we went to work on Saturday morning and went home Thursday afternoon. So hopefully you never have to go through that. But I think the latest on one night was 8 a.m. the next morning. There is a benefit to the supermajority. There's fewer people there to complain about things. So that does help things go a little faster. So you come to Sacramento after going to college in North Carolina and a stint working as a correspondent for the Raleigh News and Observer. So you've had a rare opportunity to cover politics in 2 very distinct state capitals. So comparing the two, how do our characters here compare with the characters back there? And how is it different covering things here versus covering things there?
I'd say it's very different. I was born and raised in Burlingame, California, so I was fairly steeped into California politics before going to college. But as far as the differences covering the legislatures in North Carolina and California, it's fairly similar in terms of just the sheer volume of activity and the flurry of things going on any given day. What I would say that's different is the makeup of the legislature. In North Carolina, it tilts more toward the Republicans, and there's issues of gerrymandering. When I was correspondent, House Bill 2, the bathroom bill as it's known, was a top issue of the time, and you see a lot of contentious social issues taking place. California, it's a very clear Democratic majority, which you don't see in North Carolina as more of the swing state. And with that comes a little bit of ease as far as preparing yourself for the day and knowing what issues will go through and what issues will not. So I'd say that's probably the biggest difference, is North Carolina was a little bit more unpredictable than California.
Yes, and it's interesting, too, that issues like bathroom bill or gerrymandering, we dealt with those like 5 years or more ago with kind of a yawn. So we kind of sit back and look at the craziness in these other states and think, yeah, we've been there, done that. You sort of dove right in here and kind of really the heart of the legislative season, the busy months. Let's talk about a couple of these issues you covered. So first, an issue that I know is near and dear to your heart as an Oakland A's fan, and who knows, things look good. It could be the year, and you previously were a sports reporter. So one of the biggest issues, but maybe not biggest, highest profile the last week was legislation to grant a CEQA exemption to the A's for wherever they may decide to build a new stadium. There is also one for the Clippers. They have a plan there kicking around for Inglewood. So what do you think? Being an A's fan and seeing all the stops and starts of stadiums, do you think this is finally going to grease the wheel to get a long overdue stadium somewhere in Oakland, or you think we're going to be back at square one next year at this time?
Putting aside my personal strong feelings toward the Oakland Athletics and just talking about the policy of everything, it looks like the A's are going to have a new stadium. And I talked with the Oakland A's president a couple months ago. His name's Dave Covell, and he was very optimistic that the timeline established will actually turn into reality. So all this talk of a new stadium will become the reality of a new stadium by 2023. That's the anticipated date. The two different options in play right now is one in Jack London Square, which is more picturesque than it is now, but there's concerns about transportation, accessibility. The other option is, hey, let's use our existing property. Since Oracle's out of the way with the Warriors gone, we can sort of renovate the existing Oakland Coliseum that we have. So those are the two options being explored, and what the CEQA exemption will do, according to the Oakland A's, is it'll provide some certainty and relief in getting that timeline accomplished.
We shall see. It seems like there's a lot of... I heard there's a thing, too, with weather issues at Jack London Square, that there might be wind issues and Major League... You may have Candlestick kind of times two, there. So it will be interesting to see. Championships are usually a good way to strike while the iron's hot, so we're not looking ahead too far, but maybe this will be it. So the other, I'd say, the big issue of the last month, at least in terms of the eyes of most people in the public, was the long wait times at the DMV. I mean, I know my mom randomly had to get her driver's license renewed, and it was the first day the Real ID Act stuff started. So she had like a 5-hour wait, and then they asked her, do you want the Real ID? And I'm glad she said yes. I don't know why they would offer, otherwise, because who would want to go through all that again? But, you've certainly seen nothing that lit a fire under more members of the legislature recently than this issue. You've done a lot of great reporting on the issue, and you found one of the things that we may not be thinking about, which is the role that technology is playing in this whole thing. Tell our listeners what you found in your reporting, and might this make the problem worse going forward?
Yeah, so just a little bit of context. There were two different hearings in the legislature that took place. First week they came back in August. One of them was a budget hearing, and the other one was an audit hearing. And during the audit hearing that took place, Assemblyman Jim Patterson had a whistleblower come in to speak, and he was, I believe, in Southern California, some office manager, and he's very steeped into the technology issues, and I spoke with him as well, and he called the system, or referred to it as, quote, a 40-year-old dinosaur. And what he's referring to there is a green screen command line interface that's very old. If you're not sure what a green screen command line interface is, that might just speak to how old it is. So the technology issues are one thing that the DMV is continuing to grapple with. One of the more interesting points that I found as far as technology goes is the queuing system. And what took place under the previous system was it's just how you get your number. That's what the queuing system is. So how it used to work as of late last year was, hey, Tim, you got to come into the DMV. Let's give you your number, print it out, press of a button. There you go. There's your number. But under this new system, what it was is, hey, Tim, what's your first name? What's your last name? What's your phone number? So the clerks are collecting this information that's taking a longer amount of time to collect, and they're trying to give you a unique number for some reason. And the goal was to get people to accept text messages and receive notifications, but that didn't turn out to be the reality. So now they've scaled that back and tried to revamp it to get it to work. So that's sort of the technological issues. If you look at why wait times have increased over time. A good thing to look at, besides Real ID, which is critically important, is also the technological infrastructure within the department.
You saw all the fireworks in the committee, and there's never fireworks in a legislative committee, especially when reporters and cameras are present. There's never such a thing. So I feel like the department's kind of doing their thing, but I think we're kind of in limbo maybe, with the legislature adjourned. So what do you think when they come back? There's one thing, never stand between a legislator and a camera. What do you think is the next shoe to drop? What do you think might the legislature do when they come back in December/January on the issue?
Well, it's a dangerous proposal to ask a reporter to try and predict the future in politics. So I'll steer clear of that one because who knows what can happen in the legislature. But what I'll say is that the lawmakers who I spoke with, there was one critical moment in the audit hearing where Senator Allen had a chance to vote in support of the audit. And that really was the swing vote that could have made the difference. I won't get into the voting policies, but that was a key moment. And he asked the state auditor to address whether this is feasible, a priority. And the issue that he expressed was, hey, this is going to take several months. We don't have several months. We need this issue resolved now. And at that same time, the governor's office had reached out to him and said, basically, hey, we got this. We can address it. They didn't, to my understanding, say, don't vote for the audit. But what they said was, this is a priority for Jerry Brown. And then after he didn't vote, effectively killing it, Jerry Brown called him the next day and said to Senator Allen that this is going to be a top priority. As far as what's coming down the pipeline, I can tell you this isn't a dead issue, and the Sacramento Bee is going to continue to report on it, and I might be having a couple things in the near future.
Very good. That's why you should read Capitol Alert every morning. So one of the things that I love about Capitol Alert is that you shine a light. Every bill is special, but maybe some of the ones that aren't getting so much attention. And as a former staffer who had to promote those bills that weren't getting so much attention, I appreciate that. So what's maybe one of these bills that you've written a little bit about that California should be paying attention to or should be paying more attention to, but they aren't, and why?
Well, I'll promote the work of one of our great interns. Well, our great intern, Caitlin Chen. She had a story recently about a bill where lawmakers wouldn't have to be in their district to be a candidate. So I would promote that and say that's one thing that really hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention that's worth exploring. So as far as bills go, I'd look there. But for me, one of the biggest things that isn't really receiving that much attention is a law. It's the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 that was passed and signed in June. And I had an article that said California's consumer privacy law isn't as sweeping as you might think. And it basically touched on the contents of the bill, looking at an in-depth, comprehensive look at what it will do. And for listeners who aren't familiar, what it will mean for their everyday lives, it'll just be you want to request information from Facebook or a tech company starting January 1st, 2020. You will have the ability to do that. And if there's data breach on encrypted data or non-encrypted data, then you can sue the companies for up to $750. So that's the surface level of, hey, this will have a big impact on you to know what information is out there and to potentially sue companies that abuse your information. And on the surface, that sounds like it's very thorough and comprehensive, and it was heralded as the most sweeping legislation. And while it might be the most sweeping by comparison, you really have to look at the contents of the bill where it'll disclose categories of information. So if I'm looking at Tim and I have your Facebook page, what Facebook might disclose is we have your first name, we have your last name, we have your birth date, and we have your race. But what they might not say is all the specifics of you're white, you're born this date, and it might not be as comprehensive of information you're receiving. So I would point to that as one thing that was heralded as sweeping, and the attention has sort of died down on it. But I'd refer people to that article of it's not as sweeping as you might think, because that's one thing that really isn't getting that much attention. That is going to affect everybody. Everybody's on Facebook or Twitter, and technology is something that will be of critical importance going forward.
I know in the aftermath of the big European data change earlier this summer, if you were on any mailing list or if you work with MailChimp or Constant Contact, I think I got about 1 million emails, and every time you opened up the program, click here, are you sure you want to do this, make sure you're set here. And I'm glad we don't have any subscribers in Europe and didn't have to pay attention as much. But what I think is interesting too is that was stunning how it went down. The new, and both, and at the same time, that soda tax thing, which was fascinating too, is the same way of, because of the initiative process, these big-heeled backers kind of put a gun to the head of the legislature and said, cut a deal with me or else. And in both cases, they did, to varying degrees of satisfaction. But
yeah, it was an interesting initiative process. But what I would say that was different about consumer privacy, unlike some of the soda ones where you just see two sides that can't come to any sort of agreement. You saw Alistair McTaggart. He's a San Francisco real estate developer who spent more than $3 million on this initiative campaign, and he actually reached a compromise with the tech companies. And it wasn't so much lawmakers reacting to both sides being completely on opposite ends. It was lawmakers reacting to a compromise between the two, where if you're a tech company, you don't want to have to spend millions or maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you're Alistair McTaggart, you don't think you can compete financially with all the big companies, even though public support might be in your favor for now. So the two sides reached a deal on it, and it got printed on a Tuesday and voted on a Friday and then signed into law Friday afternoon, all within 3 days in a period of hours. So it was an interesting process, certainly, but it was a little bit different because of both sides being able to reach a compromise. I didn't really see it as a leverage play per se. It was more both sides realizing here's what's at stake. Neither of us want to spend millions of dollars and potentially.
You teased it a little bit, but I'm sure as we go into the fall campaign, you're going to have some interesting things on Capitol Alert and in your reporting. So can you give our listeners a little bit of a tease? What can they expect coming up?
Well, coming up, we're going to be making an announcement very soon. I'd love to make it on this show, but I'll tease it instead and say that we're getting into the audio side of things and launching something very soon that should be interesting to the Capitol community, and I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be something for people to look out for. In addition to that, I'm also covering Prop 12, which is the cage-free animal confinement practices initiative that's on the ballot. I'm also working on a few agricultural related stories that's coming up, and always I was a media analytics second major in college, so I'm always a data nerd, and I like looking at 538 and House races. So it'll be interesting to follow the horse race as well for the Capitol Alert newsletter. So those are a couple of things down the pipeline that your listeners should really look forward to.
Read what the Bee has to say and not these DC people, because California reporters have a better pulse, I think. This will be my editorializing. Bryan may not be able to publicly agree with me, but I think our California political reporters do a much better job of handicapping the California races than our DC friends. I will say that.
Well, I'll just say we have a fantastic team here of dedicated reporters, and I'm looking forward to that audio announcement coming up soon, because we have a lot of tremendous reporters, and if there's a time to invest in journalism, you hear a lot of people saying the news is too much these days, it's overwhelming. Well, while it may be overwhelming, you have to invest in good journalism, and that's what we try and do each and every day. So if you like us or don't, but you want to stay involved, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe online. That's a real big push of ours, and we just think we have a tremendous group of people here trying to do what our readers want, and that's just provide good journalism.
So now that we've gotten the news and politics out of the way, the real reason why I wanted Bryan to come on our podcast is he wrote the greatest article, and you must check it out if you haven't seen it. I would call it really more of a how-to guide to eating at one of my favorite restaurants, which is the Cracker Barrel, which is finally opening. It's opened in Sacramento, and I know they're opening a few around the state. I've had the chance to visit Cracker Barrel every time I go to North Carolina or anywhere in the South. We always have to eat at Cracker Barrel. And so tell our listeners why they should be as excited as we are with Cracker Barrel coming to California and what they have in store for them when they go to visit.
So I'll preface this that I am very biased, and I have a conflict of interest with Cracker Barrel because my heart is all in Cracker Barrel. I think I can give that opinion since it's not politics related. I went to North Carolina for college at Elon University, and the neighboring town over, Burlington, had a Cracker Barrel, and that was almost my second home, if you will. I love the fried chicken with a side of mashed potatoes, brown gravy on the side. You get your mac and cheese, your fried apples, maybe a little blackberry cobbler for dessert, or you can get a campfire barbecue over the summer. So I'm a big Cracker Barrel fan and would highly recommend it to anyone. I would recommend checking out the guide on the SacBee's website as well. You can see a little bit of my humorous side, and certainly it's one of the favorite articles I've gotten some reaction to.
I am a chicken and dumplings man, and it's dumplings, not dumplings. And it's not and. But also, you can't go wrong with a vegetable plate with no vegetables.
Yeah, I wish the listeners can see me shaking my head. You have the word vegetables, and that's just a default reaction of mine. My mom was a public health nurse, so if I hear the word salad, sushi, or vegetables, my initial reaction is, no, you're at Cracker Barrel. Don't get French fries. Get something you can't get anywhere else. Don't get vegetables. Get some good country-style home cooking.
All this talk about food has made me thirsty. So we always end these next round podcasts. We love nothing more than talking about politics and policy than to have a good glass of something. So I'm sure you've had to enjoy whatever favorite beverage of your choice on long nights covering the Capitol. So what are you drinking these days to celebrate the end of the legislative session?
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. We had an introducing Bryan Anderson article when I came here, and there was a first draft. We didn't end up including it, but I'll include it here for you. And I don't drink. I don't smoke. I've never had alcohol, nothing of that nature at all. But because the question was, what's your favorite sort of adultish beverage? I'll give you one with an alcoholic name in it, and it's called cheer wine. It's not wine at all. It's very absurdly red soda, very cherry Coke almost. And it's from Salisbury, North Carolina. And I was living with my cousins in the area for a while when I came to the Bee. And they surprised me one day because I was a little bit homesick for North Carolina. And they got a 4-pack of cheer wine. And I was the happiest person on earth. You get a bottle of it at Bevmo, or I think Rayleigh's might have it. It's very difficult to come by. And I know Cracker Barrel also sells cheer wine as well. So if you're in Cracker Barrel or Bevmo, I highly recommend cheer wine. For the adult beverages otherwise, I'll have to defer to you, Tim, on that.
We don't have enough time to go through all my recommendations, but Cracker Barrel also, one of the great things is the store where they have all this stuff. I've never purchased anything in the store, but it's great kind of Southern themed things to look at. And they have the kind of retro sodas. And one of them, a good friend of mine, she would always joke about, let's get off work and go have a Nesbitt. Well, nobody under 80 years old knows what a Nesbitt is, but it's an orange soda from like the 1950s. And they sell it at Cracker Barrel. It's like $4 for one bottle. But so it seems like Cracker Barrel would be the kind of place to have cheer wine.
I'll take notes on that.
Well, Bryan, thanks so much. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for taking the time, Tim. Happy to be here.
Thanks to our guest, Bryan Anderson, and to Tim Anaya. You can subscribe to Capital Alert and get a subscription to the Sacramento Bee at sacbee.com. And you can follow Bryan Anderson on Twitter at Bryan R. Anderson and Capital Alert on Twitter at Capital Alert. And don't forget to save the date. Our Sir Anthony Fisher Gala in San Francisco takes place on Saturday, November 10th. Our keynote speaker is none other than media commentator Mark Stein. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. We hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.